welcome to the show with me, Dan, and my guest back again is Nick. How you doing?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, pretty good, thank you. Pretty good. I think we just sort of the reason to get you back on was it was great to talk to you, but also I felt like there was a lot more that we could go into on our last conversation. And we spoke for a half of it about your teaching and your history with teaching and sort of what's going on at the moment in your school with the coronavirus and stuff like that. And then the second half of it, we got more into you being an LGBT champion in your school and your history of being gay and how that journey took hold in the school and things like that. So I thought maybe we could delve a bit more into the sort of LGBT side of the conversation, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay. So I guess we'll start off quite simple. What does LGBT mean? What do those letters stand for? What does it mean to you? The sort of issues or the movement or however you want to put it.
Yeah, sure. So LGBTQ. Sometimes the Q's added, sometimes it's not. So taking each letter in turn. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, LGBT, so transsexual, and then Q is sometimes used as queer, sometimes used as questioning. And interestingly, I had a colleague of mine on Tuesday, I think it was, come and seek some advice about the Q part of it. She was discussing with her class the Black Lives Matter protests and movement that's been galvanised in the past 2 or 3 weeks, and that conversation is extended into Pride Month and LGBTQ rights and things like that. And she was unsure of the Q. And as I said to her, it can either stand for queer, as in the gay movement has reclaimed that name, once used as a term of abuse and nastiness, as it were, reclaimed that and can use that to mean a person that fancies the person of the same sex, or questioning if somebody is unsure if perhaps they do identify with one of the other letters, L being lesbian for women who are sexually attracted to other women, G being gay for usually but not exclusively men who are sexually attracted to men. Funnily enough, I as a lesbian usually refer to myself as a gay woman. I don't really know why that is, that's just what I do. B being bisexual, a person of either gender being sexually attracted to either gender, and T, transsexual, somebody who identifies as the opposite gender to that they were assigned at birth.
Okay. So with the letters, so that seems to be a point of confusion for some people, because you said sometimes the Q's on the end. I've heard that it's QI, and I did a little research, and there's some of the longest one I saw had a lot of letters. I'll just say it out. It was like LGBTIQCAPGNGFNBA. So I guess some of the confusion is sort of for the people that don't want to offend anyone in terms of getting the right terminology. Do you find that there's a better way to describe the LGBT or LGBTQ? Or
I think it's become quite politicised, and in some ways, I'm just a gay woman trying to lead my life, and I suppose act in some ways as a bit of a role model at school, or certainly by being open and being out and talking about my journey, hopefully giving some courage and some support to kids or families who may be on their own journey. For me, how can I explain? I think it's right that we have the thought about difference. Some people that are heavily involved with the LGBT scene and have been from the beginning, of course, they were, as gay men, lesbian women in the main to begin with, were completely sort of ostracised from society. It's hard to imagine today that it's really quite recent that in recent history that homosexuality was decriminalised. It was never against the law for lesbians. That has a lot to do with Queen Victoria and her not believing that lesbians could take part in a sexual act, so therefore they couldn't do anything, so it wasn't illegal.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So it was illegal for gay men, but not illegal for gay women.
Yeah, which is just one of those peculiar quirks of Victorian history. But homosexuality wasn't decriminalised until the 1960s, I believe, and then the equal age of consent wasn't until certainly the late 80s. I think it was the late 80s rather than the 90s. I'd have to check to be sure. So when Stonewall and organisations and things like that came about and were campaigning for all of those equal rights for people at that time, gay men and gay women, lesbians, as you prefer, they were fighting for their rights, and slowly that then developed, and it was recognised that some people don't fit into that binary position of straight or gay, they're bisexual. So those people kind of were incorporated within the lesbian gay community. Then that extended to transsexuals, and then it continued to extend and extend and extend. From what I see, trying to follow organisations that are supporting particularly young people on their journey, there's some people within the community that feel essentially that the community has got so big and so diverse that one sort of community, one organisation, as it were, can't possibly champion or give voice to all of the different individuals that it's trying to serve. So some organisations have dropped the Q, have dropped the T, have never got beyond that anyway, but then have dropped that. Other organisations are sort of fully embracing, and hence you found you're an acronym that went on to 8 or 9 letters or something like that. For me, is the name important? No, not particularly. But I think what we do need to do is establish a certain amount of common language, so as people can understand who they are themselves, and then can communicate that of who they are to themselves. Like I was saying last week, if I use myself as an example, I was born as a woman, so my sex is female, and I do identify as a woman. It's more in recent years that the whole idea of gender has become more of a talking point, I suppose. I'm sexually attracted to women, and I'm emotionally attracted to women. Therefore, throughout my life, or certainly since coming out in my early 20s, I've only sought and had relationships with women, and now I'm married and have a wife. So to have that, to be able to have that language of the difference between the sex that you were born with, the sex that you're given with, being able to talk about people that you're sexually attracted to or emotionally attracted to, and those sorts of things, I think can only be helpful, sometimes it feels a little bit ridiculous to argue over the semantics of words. So again, if I just take myself for example, I have many years ago I was involved with a local lesbian social group, a mixture of women of all ages, and there were some members of that group who were very, very protective of the word dyke. So dyke is often used as a slang term or a derogatory term, particularly by straight men, to be thrown at more butch-looking lesbians. But within the lesbian community themselves, some women choose to call themselves a dyke if they have never had a sexual relationship with a man.
Okay.
And if then they're in the company of a woman who uses that term, they will almost interrogate her to ensure the authenticity of her use of that word. And to me, that seems a little bit pointless. I kind of think even in 2020, although the world has shifted on its axis completely in my 47 years of life, there's still a way to go. And I kind of find it unhelpful that from within the community there would be problems created rather than it all being a supportive community. But that, again, that's very much my own personal view.
Yeah, okay. So what you're sort of saying is that the problem with semantics and the debate over what we should be calling people is not just from outside of the LGBT community. It's also happening from within as well. And it's is that sort of what you're saying? Is it's still an ongoing discussion of the labels we put on things and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the point of view, for viewers listening, probably viewers listening, the audience listening, that it probably sounds a bit like a minefield, and I would say to them, yes, it is a minefield, but don't worry about that. I think that there's really small gains, small things that everybody can do in order to make everybody feel much more comfortable. So, for example, when you meet somebody, whether it be at work or at in a social event, and you're talking to a woman, for example, or who you believe to be a woman. If the conversation moves and you want to ask about whether they're married and what their spouse does, instead of saying, "Oh, and what does your husband do?"
Right.
Because that kind of immediately communicates that you've made a judgment about that person, and that person, if they are a lesbian, would then have to think, "Oh, they've assumed I've got a husband. Are they going to be receptive to me telling them, no, I've got a wife, or not?" It can cause that sort of bit of hesitancy in the conversation. Whereas if you ask a more generic question or more open question, or what does your partner do, or do you have a partner, that gives the person responding to that the perfect opportunity to say, "Oh yes, my wife, she's a teacher like I am," in my case, obviously. Those sorts of, I suppose it's try not to make assumptions, try not to be led so much by what you can see and what you think that means, but just to ask more general things, and try and be a little bit neutral until that person has given you some clues.
Do you find? Sorry.
Okay, sorry, no, go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say, just again from I completely agree. Like what you're talking about is this mindset of openness and inclusivity and actually feeling like there's many different people out there, and trying to just tailor your language or just think about certain things in your language and your assumptions that would include people that might be different to what your assumptions might be. I guess one of my questions would be, just again from an outside perspective, someone who doesn't consider myself queer or an LGBT individual. I've gone to Pride March in London, and I count myself part of it in that sense of sort of like supporting, rights and human rights and things like that.
An ally, in other words.
Yeah.
And that has become a common term. So if you are supportive of LGBT rights and the LGBT community, you would then use that term. I'm an ally.
Right. Yeah, and I guess the Black Lives Matter movement are using that as well. If you're a white person and you support the movement, then you're. I guess one of my questions as a sort of person, I guess outsider or a straight cisgendered male, do you find that, because I think what I get the feeling of with some people is that they're a bit worried of backlash. I've talked about it in a previous podcast with this sort of cancel culture. But I think it can also, and that was sort of more social media based, but I think it can also happen on a personal level as well. This fear that if you say the wrong thing, or if, you were talking about this sort of this problem with the word dyke in the lesbian community. Have you found that's been a thing that you've come across where people can be quite, if I say the wrong thing, that people can be quite defensive, or they can be quite judgmental, that you're not using the right terms and the right wording? Or do you find that is it's such a rare case that people actually are quite, I don't know the right word, combative in those sort of situations?
I suppose for me it's quite sort of straightforward almost. In my life now, I lead, to all intents and purposes, a sort of a very traditional life, like any woman would lead, apart from my husband isn't a husband, she's a wife. So I have a small network of friends, of a very close family, all of the people in a great set of work colleagues. So all of the people within my close life are know my story, know me, and are incredibly supportive. In my professional life, and we've emailed each other, so you may have noticed that my email signature is perhaps longer than most, and within that it gives the title or the areas of responsibility within my job. But I also have a little bit in there that gives people enough information to know how I like to be treated. So I let them know that my name is my full name, and that my given name is Nicola, but that I prefer to be called Nick. I let them know that I'm female and that I use the pronouns she and her. And I also let them know that I'm married, and it displays my title as Mrs., which is after 46 years of being Miss. That's been quite. I didn't realise how important a name, or how used to a name that you get. But anyhow, that's a whole different story. So I suppose I paved the way in some ways, and sort of put it out there to strangers how I want to be treated, or how I like to be addressed. Usually in the wide world, I mean, Joe and I, we spend a lot of time going to National Trust properties and gardens, or go out for cake and coffee. And to be perfectly honest, people don't usually give us a second take. They see two women having a drink together, and usually people are very, very supportive. When we've been since being married, we had to go into the bank a number of times and change accounts and say that we've been married. And every time we did that, the first thing from anybody said, "Oh, congratulations!" Or "Did you have a lovely day?" And start asking questions like, I assume they would ask anybody. So again, a reflection that the world has changed quite a lot. So I don't find, or haven't found in recent times, that people are unsure of how to talk about me and how to talk about to me. Sometimes there is a lot of confusion when conversations have opened up about people who identify as trans, and that can be that seems to me to be a very difficult concept for a lot of people to get around, and perhaps we'll talk about that more in a moment. But one thing I will say, the thing that I do find that happens an awful lot, and has even on more than one occasion happened at school, and this is where recording a podcast is quite difficult. So I'll give you a quick description of what I look like. I'm not a small woman. I'm about 5'11", and I'm not thin by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I'm quite have a heavy build and do carry a bit of extra weight. Growing up, I was always a tomboy. I always played football. I've always preferred to wear shorts and trousers rather than skirts and dresses. I haven't worn a skirt or a dress for over 25 years. It was a constant battle at school to have to wear a skirt, and I'm of the generation where girls weren't afforded the luxury of wearing trousers. So, and I do, I think I said, have wear my hair short. I go to the barbers rather than the hairdressers. Usually have a number 2 around the side and back. So, and I don't wear makeup or anything like that. I don't tend to accessorize. I don't carry a handbag. Things like that. So often when people don't look at me properly, they just see the sort of my bulk, for want of a better description, and they think that I'm a bloke. Right. And in passing, that's fine. That's not a problem. But what I do find really difficult, and sometimes it affects me more than other times, is using public toilets. And the number of times that I've joined a queue in the ladies' toilets, even as a man, you will know ladies always have a queue. Yeah. You know, and you kind of think, I'll just wait for the look. And then, you know, more often than not, the look comes. Or sometimes I walk into the ladies' toilet and somebody will look at me and they'll say, "The gents is next door." And right. And then I kind of have to stand there, you know, all 5'11" of me, all 47 years old of me, and say, "It's okay, I'm a woman. I'm in the right place." And then, you know, that just almost a bit of a look of, sometimes it's almost a look of disgust, a look of shock, a look of, and that's really hard. Or other times I could be washing my hands and somebody will come into the toilets, and I'm suddenly aware that although the door's open, they haven't actually come into the room. And then I realise, because you can see in the mirror, what's actually happening is that woman that's just come into the bathroom is comparing me to the picture of the woman on the door and going backwards and forwards and kind of assessing if they are in the right place and what is happening. Right. And like I said, sometimes I suppose it's all to do with how you're feeling in yourself. Sometimes that I can just brush that off and laugh that off, and, you know, humour's a great softener for all sorts of things. Oh, it's all right, you know, I am in the right place. I've just got short hair, or, you know, something like that. And at other times, perhaps when you're feeling a little bit more tired, a little bit more vulnerable or whatever, it can really hurt. And it's kind of difficult to explain why it hurt, because although, like I said last week, I'm not overly bothered about being a woman as such, but I wouldn't want to be a man. I just kind of think I'm just who I am, and my gender is neither here nor there. But we live in a world in which when you go to a public toilet, 98% of the time, you have to choose the one that's designated by your gender. So I go to the right one and then have a negative experience. I find that really, really difficult. I can only think for people who are trans, who do identify as the opposite gender to that they were born with. There must be so many times at which those sorts of things are incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And I don't actually know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if you had any, because I think this is a key. I think the reason I'm so interested in sort of LGBT and especially trans is because there's so many what I consider to be grey areas that are really, really difficult. And I think it's really, anything I find difficult and anything I'm really unsure about, and I can see sort of both sides of a discussion, is something that I love to talk about, because I feel like there's loads that needs to be unpacked. And I think throughout this conversation you might hear me sort of play devil's advocate quite a lot, not because I have strong views, it's just because just offering up other people's views that could come about. So you're not really sure how to make that sort of situation better when there's, there are the male and female toilets and people who, I guess, to play in that situation, the devil's advocate role. Not that I'm condoning people that react to you in that way when you're queuing up, but just to say what a point of view might be, is this concern about having, again, it doesn't apply to you, but having this sort of hazy area when it comes to toilets means that people who might want to exploit that, it leaves that open, and then there's problems around sort of like male and female being in the same toilet, and the sort of safety concerns with things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a really difficult area. I mean, I feel in lots of ways much more comfortable in talking about my own experiences, but we'll try and relate them as best as I can to things that have been happening more recently. So another area that can be difficult is changing rooms. I don't know what men's changing rooms are like. I've never been in them, but some women's shops, I don't know if they still do. I don't tend to shop in real shops anymore, and certainly have no desire to at the moment. But some women's changing rooms in the past, they would be a big communal changing area, and I certainly remember that as a teenager, and that was awful, absolutely awful. More recently, all female changing rooms are all cubicle, each individual cubicles. That's a huge improvement. I can think of a couple of shops, particularly at the Galleria in Hatfield, where their changing rooms is attendant. There's an attendant there. Each of the cubicles has floor-to-ceiling doors, which again is important, and each cubicle again floor-to-ceiling partitions. And it's just a bank of cubicles. So you would never know who was changing next to you if it was all female, because they're individual cubicles. So it doesn't matter that there could be a man changing next to you. And similarly, my favourite type of toilet, and this is ridiculous, that I know that the headquarters of the National Trust, which is in Swindon, just outside the outlet centre there, they have toilets that are of a similar arrangement. So where the toilet I think there's 4 cubicles, again floor to ceiling height. Each one is labelled with male and female, and then each cubicle, it's more than a cubicle, it's a small room, and it has a toilet, it has hand washing facilities, it has everything that you would expect.
Mm.
So it's a one-shop shop, as it were. And they're my favourite toilets because that just alleviates the problem. And it's a toilet for a person, and a person uses that toilet. Some of those toilets have a changing facility in there for babies. So again, it doesn't matter if it's dad changing the baby or if it's mum changing the baby, or granddad or uncle or aunt or whoever is there. And similarly, some of those small rooms, as it were, have disabled grab rails and such as those sorts of things. So it just makes it available to everybody. And I suppose in an ideal world, I would like all buildings to be redesigned in that way. That would seem to make a lot of sense. And perhaps there'll come a time when, as part of building regulations and so on and so forth, that is regarded as the correct way to do it, in the same way that new buildings now have to be accessible for people in a wheelchair and so on and so forth. Perhaps that's another layer of the way in which the world can, grows and develops and learns from learns from the past.
And you see it,
but
you
right.
see a lot. Well, I'm just going from my own experience, but I do a lot of filmmaking in London. And I do a lot of like promotional stuff for businesses in London. A lot of these businesses are quite liberal in many different ways, as a lot of sort of the population of London are generally. So I've seen a lot, I would say more so than not, when I've been filming at offices or places in London, that there are unisex toilets. So I think it is, and change rooms as well. I don't do a lot of shopping myself. Buy most of my clothes from charity shops, but like whenever I have, or even in charity shops, it's there are, the changing rooms are, I think, just going by memory, are unisex. So it seems that's going well in terms of the maybe more liberal parts of the country or more liberal parts of the world. It seems that unisex toilets are becoming more normal. I know that my partner works in a place where they've got unisex toilets, and she works in London. One thing I would be considering would be, how do you feel about the people that let's say a woman, for example, who feels that the women's changing, or the woman's toilets for her at work are a safe space almost, or like a place where she feels comfortable, and that combining male and female together. I know people that work in London actually have a bit of an uncomfortable reaction to the male and female toilets being together. Is that something that, I don't know, it seems like that's a difficulty that this sort of movement of unisex toilets might come up against?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's been, I don't know if you've read any of it, a well-publicised, I don't really know what you call it. I only tend to use Twitter for educational things, but sometimes things spill over. And I know J.K. Rowling and the cast of Harry Potter, and there's been quite a lot of tweets around something that J.K. Rowling had said about that very thing, that women-only spaces, and she's concerned that the law is going to change. I think from what I've read, I think I've got the right end of the stick, that she's concerned that the law, I think first of all in Scotland, is going to change that a man can, somebody who is born as a man can self-identify as a woman with no medical discussion or intervention or anything. Essentially, he can wake up one morning and say, I now identify as a woman, I've changed my name to whatever, please use she and her as my, etc., etc. And that would then allow him to use any safe women's spaces, like like toilets, like women's refuges and things like that. And if he were an abuser, he could use that change in the law to then gain access to those safe spaces and to continue his abusive ways. And that's my understanding of J.K. Rowling's position. Right. And I think, from what I've read, I think some people have got sort of missed the main point of what she's making, because she'd made a quip about women being people who menstruate, which of course then would imply that her view is that trans women aren't real women. That's not what she was saying. She wants, as a survivor of domestic violence herself, she wants to ensure that women in those vulnerable positions are safeguarded. So there's a lot out there that is contentious. From my point of view, sort of thinking just on, within our building at school, within, the places that I go, I think it would be reasonable over time, as, the existing buildings were refurbished, when new buildings were put up. I think it's a worthwhile thing to consider. How can we make the building itself accessible to all, safe for all, have equity across all different groups of people. But at the same time, I think all people who are vulnerable in whatever way, the system needs to also protect them. I think in the instance of women, and it's not always this way around, but it often is, women being abused by predatory men, is that likely to increase if all toilets become unisex? I don't know. I'm a teacher. I'm not a researcher of those sorts of things. But my gut feeling is to say no. My gut feeling is to say that the problem isn't the fact that toilets are unisex. The problem is that there are predatory men. Preventing toilets from being unisex, to me, is just is it a quick fix? Does it show some sort of action? Yes, it does. But does it sort out the root problem? No, it doesn't. The root problem is that there are, unfortunately, people in our society that, for whatever reason, want to prey on those that they perceive to be less worthy or weaker or whatever. So whether it is men abusing women, whether it's sectors of society being racist or being homophobic or being Islamophobic or whatever, as an educationalist, I would always argue that it's the root cause of the problem that would need to be addressed. How that's addressed, again, I suppose it comes back to me being a teacher. I think it starts young, and I think it starts in school and having those conversations. And like I said last week, ensuring that the curriculum is fully inclusive and that those inclusive messages are sort of taught with clarity and with depth, rather than sort of bolted on as an additional, we're learning about X, Y, and Z. Let's just remember that actually so-and-so who did this in history, she was a lesbian, so thank the lesbians, and and that person, they did this, that, and the other, and they were black, so that's, we can't have a tick box approach to trying to educate children. We need role models, we need books that reflect the achievements of people from all different sectors of society. We need a curriculum that does that. Those sorts of things need to be celebrated, and
I guess a
Uh,
wider view, a less limited view in general, just
yeah,
sort of,
yeah,
yeah, telling stories from different perspectives, and yeah, I think I agree with that. And yeah, I accept, I completely agree that, the subject we're talking about with the toilets and other things are extremely difficult. And I probably agree with you. If I had to put a bet on, if all the toilets over 20 years or whatever became unisex in this country, I would say that on the whole, there would obviously be a small number of cases where people abuse it, but I can't imagine it would cause a huge spike. And yeah, but I think maybe that's another reason it's good that different companies and different organizations and different buildings are trying it out, because then we can look at the problems with it, if there are any, or just look at the things we need to improve upon, and then go from there. I think that sometimes trying these things out is what is needed to determine, because obviously if you just go off what our fears are, then we'll never get anything done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to sort of finish perhaps that part of the conversation. Sometimes I make an assessment, and often there is an accessible toilet between the ladies and the gents. And if I can see that it doesn't have a radar key, because obviously I don't have a radar key because I don't have a disability, and I can see that it's vacant, I will sometimes make the choice that I'll use that toilet to not run the risk of being tried to be thrown out of the ladies' toilets, and then hope that by the time I come out that nobody's waiting for it,
right, yeah,
and and that I will then be attacked for being a non-disabled person using a disabled toilet. But sometimes, for me, as silly as it sounds, that can be the decision that I make, and I kind of think it is quite ridiculous, really, because usually I just want to have a quick wee, to be perfectly honest, and it doesn't take long. But yeah, who would have thought that an everyday function could cause quite so much difficulty for the world?
yeah. Okay, well, I think we'll move. We're still in the same same subject area. You're LGBT champion, which we mentioned last time, in the school. How does that manifest? What does that mean in the practical sense of what you actually do, and how you interact with the kids, as an LGBT champion? What does that mean in practical terms?
In some ways, not a lot, really.
Okay.
But in other ways, really quite significantly. But it's not one of those things that I overly promote, if that makes sense. It's it's a real. But that said, it's a really integral part of my job. So I think the biggest change has been that I have that that signature on my email account. So everybody that I interact with through my school email, which is quite an extensive group of people. Obviously, it's parents and carers of the children that I teach. It's colleagues in our school, colleagues in other schools. It gives that recognition that here is a school that recognises that group of students, and interestingly also that group of parents needs a voice, and that they've got an ally within school. So I think that was a really important shift.
So I think a big part of it is sort of symbolic as well.
Yeah. In some ways, it just sort of very subtly waves the rainbow flag, as it were, in all that I do, but without being in your face. Similarly, I will share things. I shared something on Facebook just the other day about an online support for LGBTQ kids that Central Bedfordshire runs. So I will, I'd be the person that anything like that comes to school, which does from time to time, I'll be the person to then push that back out to our school community via our Facebook page and all of those sorts of things. So our community knows that I exist, and that as a school we have a listening ear, which I think is really important. From the point of view of the children, even during this period of some time in school and some time of home learning, we've continued to have weekly assemblies for each year group, which has just been fantastic. So the first assembly that we had in June, I took a picture of myself and Joe. I'd redesigned our school logo and incorporated the Pride rainbow into it, and just said, Pride Month this month, happy Pride. We've been up to this, that and the other, whatever it was that week. See you soon. So again, just being visible and reminding the children that Joe and I are married, and just being a positive influence there. And that has led to some quite remarkable conversations and things like that. So as a school, we've been approached by 3 or 4 parents and their children who have been embarking upon a journey of their own. And again, for those parents, and most importantly those children, to know that they're going to come into an environment and have a conversation that isn't going to be bound up in any sort of judgment, that will be a receptive and welcoming listening ear, has been really, really useful. Really, really useful. And some of those conversations have led to changes in the direction of some kids' lives. I think that would be fair to say that. And they've, from a period of wondering how they would ever go forward, their life has blossomed and changed in all sorts of directions as well. But also I think for our school, being a middle school where, we have children until they're 13, some can almost be 14 as they're leaving our school. So that is a key time when those thoughts about identity and who I am and all of that, and puberty, and is really well and truly kicked in and can be a troubling time. Part of my role, I've just sort of been able to talk to staff about it. When we first decided that I would take on this role, I did a short inset presentation and discussed many of the things that you and I have discussed in actual fact. It's given staff permission almost to ask those awkward questions, and quite often, over the photocopier, somebody will randomly say, "Oh, hi Nick, how are you? I was just wondering, you might be, I think you'll be able to help me with this. I just don't get it when somebody says they're trans, so they're a boy, but they want to be a girl, but then they fancy girls. How does that work?" And I find myself, trying to do my photocopy and trying to answer those kinds of questions that are quite challenging and quite difficult. But actually, what I found is it gives those people around me sort of the confidence to first of all say, to say, I don't understand, I don't know, I've not experienced this. This is outside of my comfort zone, this is outside of my experience, outside of my knowledge bank, and I need to get educated. And often they have a conversation with me and I give them a clumsy explanation that I think of, and then the two of us go away and independently find something that is much more suited and gives a much better answer. I've learned a tremendous amount. But I think without somebody who is able to do those things, it just doesn't allow those conversations to come to the fore.
More likely for it to stay as a taboo.
Yeah, and just to kind of think, well, I really should do something about that. Oh, but that's a bit tricky and that's a bit difficult. I'll just mark my books because that's a bit easier to do. And and it just, in my experience, people, whether they're teachers or not, they want to do their best. That we're sort of almost pre-programmed to do that. But when we're faced with something tricky to do that we don't know how to do our best with it, it can just fall off the bottom of the list of things that we do because it's doing something that's hard by definition is hard, and by nature the vast majority of people are lazy. We live busy, tight lives, and it's just that one extra thing to research on Google that it just falls by the wayside, not for any homophobic reasons or any not caring reasons, just because it's hard. And also, what do you search it for? What do you type into that search bar? So it can be problematic in that way. And just like I say, having somebody that hopefully is friendly and open, it can just pave the way.
No, it's amazing. And I think when you describe it in that way, it's really important as well for people to hear, because I think some of these sort of issues, whether it's gender, sexuality, race, they're very sensitive subjects for most people. And I think especially with stuff like social media and the tabloids and things like that, it can be depicted as two sides in a war, of a war of ideologies, of this is what I think, and I'm this way, and you're like that, and you're that way, and the main thing you're talking about is welcoming and inclusivity and discussion, and these are all things that I think are really important to promote. And I think that's an amazing thing that I take from what you're saying that you do and what you stand for at the school. It's on the face of it, someone who is less aware of what LGBT champions are, which I was before chatting to you. It's easy for people to think, they're just someone who just pushes an agenda and is just trying to impose their views and things like that. And it's always refreshing when you actually speak to someone past any stigma, past any sort of image or, like I say, social media and tabloid rubbish, and actually see what are they doing, what are they not doing, what is actually going on there. So I think, it's amazing. And I think that it's a great thing, especially in schools, to have that. And I'd love to see more of that, diversity champions,
Absolutely. I would completely agree with you. And I think it's almost, instead of there being a sort of a criteria that all schools should have this and this, and all sports clubs should have this and this, and all businesses should, there needs to be some of that to keep everybody safe and for businesses to function and sports clubs to follow the rules and schools to deliver the curriculum and so on. But at the same time, it's almost the way I view it, that what has happened in our school, I hate this phrase, but it is true. This role has kind of grown organically because I'm there and I have the type of personality that I have. It's been further enhanced by Joe qualifying it and then ending up to work at the same school. That was never part of either of our five-year plan, but it's fantastic that she has. And we've been able to sort of gently exploit that, yet neither of us would feel exploited. And setting it up as a kind of, we're here, we'll share some things as and when they come. But like you say, we haven't got an agenda. There's no targets attached to it. It's not part of, it's a formal part of my role, but it's not a formal part of my role that gets assessed. It wouldn't feature in my performance review.
It's just a declaration of a presence, isn't it? It's like saying,
absolutely.
We're here, and I can imagine with a lot of the sort of Black Lives Matter stuff happening at the moment, someone in the school who is, a presence of like whether they're a person of color or that they represent a deep understanding or lived experience of racial and issues, then it becomes that point in which you can start to have that conversation. Because I know there's a lot of, just from my own experience talking to friends who are either black and minority ethnic or white friends and family, there's a lot of this sort of unease and anxiousness and sort of like not wanting to say the wrong thing, but also feeling that they're not doing enough or whatever it is, just general confusion about what to do with all these things. And so I can definitely see how that is so good and so important. And I don't know if you mind if we could sort of go into sort of some difficult areas within LGBT stuff again. Is that okay? That I've just got a couple more questions. And I respect the fact that, you know, these sort of questions, there's no one answer, and it's just sort of questions that I've had in my mind that I've heard other people sort of ask over years that still sort of feel quite hazy to me.
More than happy.
So you mentioned last time, obviously you didn't say any names or anything, and that's obvious why. But you mentioned there was a trans child that came into your school, or came out as trans while they were at school.
Yeah.
And what was surprising to me, without holding any judgment, but just surprising, was you said the trans child was 7 years old. And I think this is another area similar to the toilets that is quite a sensitive area, because when it comes to children, it's what parents teach their children, what teachers teach their children, and the way that we guide children and what information we give them and things like that. I wonder if you had any thoughts. I guess this is sort of a rambling question, but around if you have a child that young, how do you sort of I think we'll take as a given that you're always kind and welcoming and you don't show any malice. I think that's a given. But what are some of the ways that you can deal with a child who was born a male and wants to identify as a female when they're as young as 7? The reason I find it such a difficult one is because their brain hasn't fully developed. There's a lot of experimentation that happens when you're a child and through your teenage years in terms of how you self-identify and things like that. And I would find it quite difficult in terms of the amount of encouragement to give them to pursue that line of thinking. But I'd also be very hesitant to suppress their feelings and to make them feel like they can't speak out and they can't say how they're feeling. I don't know if you've got any stories or you've got any thoughts on sort of this sort of confusion and stuff.
I do have some thoughts, and in a moment I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah, please do.
And as I ask you that question, if the audience listening can change the question so it's as if I'm asking them at the same time, and that might give a little bit of help. But before I do that, I just want to preface this with I don't in any way claim to be any sort of expert in trans issues, how to really in lots of ways how to support kids and all the rest of you in that way. You know, I very much in working with the young girl that I have been working with, it's very much led by parents, and there's some other complications as well that I won't go into, but so I'm very much led by the child. So before I offer some thoughts about that, the question that I will ask you, and if the listeners can change the pronouns of this to so it makes sense to them. When did you know that you were a boy?
I
love the silence.
Yeah, no, I love questions. I love people asking me questions. Because I like to think about it, especially if it's a question that I've not considered, and that's not one I've considered, especially not.
And that's the answer. I've not considered it, and I think, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, and listeners, no. I hope had a similar thought process. When you fit in with all of the normal expectations that are placed on you from babyhood, you just grow up with that expectation, with that feeling that it all fits in place and it's all right. You know, I imagine the true answer to when did you know that you were a boy, the true answer to that is, well, I've always known that. You know, I've known that from the moment my mum gave birth to me, and my mum and dad, you know, named me Dan, presumably Daniel, you know, and so on and so forth. And that's always been who you are. It's so part of you that you've never had to think what it means or what it does for you. In the same way that as an adult, you can't remember what it was like not to walk. You know, in your memory, you've always been able to do it. It's just a part of you, and so on and so forth. In the same way in which you need to write yourself a note, you don't even, you see a pen, you pick it up and you write down eggs, bacon and tea or whatever it is that you've got to buy from the shop. You don't even have to consider, oh, am I left-handed? Am I right-handed? Which end do I hold the pen? How do I fall? It's just a second nature. It's just a part of what you can do and who you are.
Sure.
And I think gender and sexuality are very much like that. Although it's kind of blurred because society still expects little girls to grow up to be women, little boys to grow up to be men. It still expects little girls to grow up and marry men and little boys to grow up and marry women. And so although we know that that's different, you know, we know that obviously you can have gay marriage and those sorts of things, and things don't necessarily need to go in that linear way. The whole way in which the world works is still very much in those sort of binary definitions. So I spoke last week about my journey. I knew at the age of 10, when I saw Annie Lennox, that I had a different reaction to her than what I assumed other girls had. I didn't know at 10 that meant that I was gay. I can look back and I know that there was a difference. I know that there was a difference in the way in which I viewed women and how I viewed myself. In my day, I very much was a tomboy, very, very much was a tomboy. And I think had I grown up now, would that have meant that I would be trans? I've thought about this a lot. I don't think it would have done. I think I've always been very comfortable being called she and her. I was never minded being called Miss, other than the fact that it used to mean I couldn't get married. I didn't mind that. Would I have gone through school wearing summer dresses when I was very little and skirts through secondary school and all the rest of it if I could have worn trousers? Of course I'd have blooming worn trousers. If you've ever worn a skirt, they're hideously uncomfortable. That's my view. So do I think that if I'd have grown up, if I'd have been born in, say, 2003 instead of 1973, would I be a trans man now? No, I don't think I would have been. Would I have had a more comfortable upgrowing in my head and physically by wearing trousers? Yes, I would have done. So using that kind of analogy to think about a young child who is thinking about their gender, first of all, we have to think about, what does being a man, what does being a woman mean? And I keep saying this, I'm no expert at all, but in really broad senses, girls usually, but not always, usually have long hair, and it's okay, accessorize and have makeup and play with dolls and like pink, all of those sort of stereotypes. And boys, have shorter hair, have different types of toys that they play with, more action figures, construction toys, play different sports. And,
See, can I just, do you mind if I just interject?
Yeah,
just because I'm still trying to work through my beliefs and my confusions about some stuff. I think what you're talking about there with the with boys, playing with action figures and having short hair. For me, my belief is that that's an issue with assigning what kids should have, as opposed to a problem with what gender they are assigned at birth. One analogy that I come up with is, I don't have a child, but if I had a child, hypothetically, obviously you never know until you have one, it's difficult to say, but I would feel that if that child wanted to, let's say I had a boy, and that child wanted to dress in dresses and wanted to wear pink, or fancied boys, or whatever, then that I wouldn't have any sort of thing to say about that. I'd just encourage him to do whatever he wanted to do, and as long as he wasn't hurting anyone or himself. My I don't know if I want to call it concern, because it makes it sound more opposing, but the area where I would have a lot more questions and a lot more hesitancy in how to react would be if my son said he was a girl, and even if he continuously said that, my concern is that it's such, obviously even us as two adults, are struggling to really come up with what exactly that means, in gender, and it's an ongoing debate, even amongst adults. So
yeah.
I feel like as a child, it's a very confusing path to go down, and I would be much more hesitant to encourage again, I'm just saying from mine, and I like to be proven wrong, and I like to be asked questions. I really do. So continue to do that, because it helps me to learn, and I enjoy learning. So, but I would be hesitant to encourage my son to identify as a girl, because I feel that would cause confusion that was unneeded, on still being a child. That's sort of where I am with it, but I'm like I say, I'm willing for you to come back at me and say and offer another point of view, I guess.
I think I understand what you're saying completely, and I think it is really very difficult in those kind of abstract terms. I mean, like you, I don't have my own children. Joe has children and grandchildren. I have previously lived with children. Of course, I've taught for over 20 years. I think my own view is that these things are learnt from a young age, and in a way in which is really quite difficult to describe. So it's really reassuring to hear that you predict into the future, and if you have a child, and if he were it was a boy, if he were to say I'm gay repeatedly, that's okay. But it would be more difficult to hear him say I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm a girl.
It would be more difficult to know how I react to that. I think when I see, again, it's just my view, I see sexuality and how you the gender you identify as two quite different things. I think sexuality is what you feel, and it's what you want, and it's what you're moving towards. And no one can tell you any different. If you're a boy who fancies a boy and you're not attracted to women, and that's just, I can't say anything against that. That's how you feel. You do whatever, love is love, and carry on. Or if you're a boy who fancies boys and girls, and you want to experiment, and that's fine. Or if you like cars, if you like rugby, if you like ballet, if you like singing, whatever it is, that's a subjective thing. Whereas with gender, when you're making a claim about your own gender, that's not, I don't feel is just a subjective thing. I feel like that's when once it becomes more of an objective truth, and encroaching more on what we consider to be objective truth, that's when more confusion comes about, and I'm just really unsure with it, because then I don't know how to react if my child was white, and my child said that he thought he was black. If my child thought, do you know what I mean? These sort of objective labels that I accept that we have as a society put on children. I just feel like there's more there. I feel a lot more confused in those sort of areas, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it is confusing. I think it is difficult, because I think that around gender, for the vast majority of people, they have never questioned their gender, because their gender fits with the sex that they were assigned at birth, and the way in which they've grown up, and the way in which their parents, family, and then school has treated them. And I think also, as time has progressed, the idea of what it is to be a man, and the idea of what to be a woman, has broadened. So certainly when I was growing up, men would never have cried. You wouldn't have seen a man cry on television, whether it be on the news or on in a fiction drama on TV or a film or anything like that. Whereas today, in today's society, men are expected, or not expected, but it's okay if they cry. It's okay if they show emotion, and in fact, it's much more encouraged, and we know that that's beneficial to mental well-being and such like. Similarly, when I was growing up, men were men if they, worked in a factory, drove a car, had 3 pints on the way home, and their wife put dinner on the table in front of them. In today's society, a man is still a man. If he does the school run in the morning and stops at Marks and Spencer's, Waitrose, other supermarkets are available, on the way home, gets the ingredients and cooks for his wife and his family at the end of the day. So those ideas about gender in my lifetime have changed in the binary positions. But I still think that for those of us who have never had to give it a thought, really can't define what it is that makes us either male or female. And I do think also that because of that, it makes it quite difficult to consider that other people don't feel in the same way. Now, with the young girl that I work with, it's been quite interesting that in the we've been working together for longer than she has been at the school, because we started transition stuff early. And now, when she first transitioned, as it were, and I have to sort of say that is just about the name in which that she uses, the pronouns that she uses,
right? So not a physical transition,
and the clothes that she wears.
Yeah.
That was, I suppose you could say, a full transition. She stopped using her given name, which was a male name, and she chose a female name.
Right.
She stopped using he and his, and she used she and her. She grew her hair long, and wore what you would consider to be a girl's school uniform.
Right,
Lots of dresses and ankle socks and those sorts of things. During that time, those things have changed slightly, and in fact, and I don't know the reasons why, but in more recent times, she has reverted to using her given name at birth. But if you ask her, are you a girl or a boy? A girl? Definitely, I'm a girl. Okay. So I check regularly. Do you want would you like me to use she and her? Yes, that's right, Miss Sharp. So that's sorted. And then in terms of her hair, that's still long, and it grows longer and longer every day, and it is really quite magnificent in actual fact. But her clothing choices are more and more eclectic, right. And sometimes will actually be quite a mixture of different styles. So it wouldn't necessarily be uncommon for her to wear a skirt, but also have a pair of trousers underneath. Our school uniform is sort of polo shirt or shirt and tie, so it's fairly androgynous on the top anyway. But then for her to have a hair, an Alice band with ears or something, sort of very cat ears or something, or bear ears or something like that, which would be very feminine. So, visually, for want of a better way, it could be quite eclectic, quite a mixture. Now, that's all really very easy to support and to be accepting of, and she has additional needs and things as well. So I, check in regularly and make sure that I'm getting it right in that sort of supportive way. Can I just check it's still this, that, and the other, and she will let me know if anything has changed. Moving forward, obviously her parents and she have potentially some difficult choices to make, and that's where they have sought support via GP and then been referred to specialist services that can then talk about all sorts of things, such as puberty blockers in the first instance, and potentially down the road with surgery. And from the little I know, but from the thinking that I have done, it's sort of that ultimate realignment, that physical realignment that most people find quite difficult to think about and quite difficult to get their head around. And I think the great worry is, what if somebody has done that and then they wake up the next day or sometime in the future and think, no, I don't feel like that anymore.
Yeah, I think my just to say sort of what my concern, I guess, would be that physical transformation on children. That I just to be a bit more specific about what the concern would be. Do you know how old you're allowed to
you know, it's not. I don't actually, and
Okay,
it's
yeah.
not. It's not. As my knowledge extends to some reading that I've done on the internet, and Louis Theroux did a series on trans kids some time ago. I don't know if that's still available.
Yeah, I saw that
Just written him online,
couple
and
of months ago. Yeah, it's on BBC
yeah,
iPlayer if anyone wants to
that's
check it out.
right.
It's really good.
Yeah, and it's usually around the time of puberty, and my understanding is that doctors, the medical profession, can prescribe puberty blockers, which do exactly what you'd expect them to do. They block those hormones that tell your body to go through puberty, so you're held. I think your physical body is sort of held in that pre-pubescent way to allow time for kids to, I suppose, to be sure. I think also, though, from other things that I've seen and that I've read, even when, if those feelings of body dysphoria come later in life, trans people's, I don't know quite what the right word is, it's not always quite as simple as I was born as one gender and I want to create my body to be how people expect it to be in the other gender. So I think I'm right in saying that for a lot of trans people, to, let's say they were born as a man but they wish to live as a woman, it's not necessarily about having that full surgery to become female. For some people it is.
Yeah, I know someone I know is likes to be referred to as a female, but they're not showing any interest in any sort of surgery. So yeah, I understand there's a I guess a spectrum or like a range of different measures that trans people want to take.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I can relate to that in the way in which I've said to you a number of times now. It's like gender for me doesn't really figure very highly on my radar. I never ever look in the women's department for shoes. Quite simply because I wear a size 10. There are places that make women's shoes in a size 10. I would never go to them. I would never want to wear a pair of shoes that look like women's shoes, court shoes, heels, or anything like that. Even if they are a 10, they're usually not. They wouldn't fit me. I can't stand the stress of it. I've happily worn men's shoes for the most of my life. I don't like all men's shoes. And I'm sure you don't like all men's shoes,
and all men's clothes. I can relate to that in the sense of
obviously, or not, maybe not obviously, but obviously, I do wear a bra and I need to. So I would, I go to Marks and Spencer's. There's a particular style that I like. Buy those. That's the only place that I can get underwear from. That's fine. That's sorted. T-shirts, shirts. I tend to wear men's T-shirts and shirts. Occasionally, something I will be usually walking through the women's department to go to the men's department. If I had a choice, I would just go to the T-shirt shop. If I had a choice, I would just go to the jeans shop.
Yeah.
But we don't yet live in a society where those things exist. You go to the male or female departments of the department store, or you go to Burton's if you want menswear, or Dorothy Perkins if you want women's wear.
Yeah. I think sorry, we might have to wrap it up fairly soon, but just maybe something to end on is something that I can relate in that sense, and it is sort of on a much smaller scale, and I know that it doesn't affect my life as much as it would sort of trans people or people who are unsure about their gender and how gender is imposed on them in the society. But a couple of years ago, me and my partner lived in a house share, and the other people in the house were very liberal in their views. They sort of in many different ways, and there was a guy there. I think he identified as a guy at the time. That was never a thing that he brought up. So we met the first time we met him. He was wearing a skirt, and I over the course of living with him and others over the course of like 6 months or 5 months. I was asking various questions. I was very curious, I was probably that annoying housemates who asked too many questions, but I was asking everyone in the house sort of a lot of questions about sort of the way they lived, and just interesting things that were fairly new to me. And he was talking about wearing skirts, and that was something actually where the way he described it, because I like to dress for comfort. Anyone who knows me or has met me will know that I don't dress for style. I usually dress based on what is comfortable and also what's cheap, and what I can get in a charity shop or whatever. And the idea of wearing like a skirt, I guess a skirt, not a dress, was what he was wearing a lot. Instead of so he would sort of have no underwear, I guess like a kilt. And I thought, actually, yeah, that sounds good, especially in the summer months, like getting a breeze and stuff like that. Actually sounds a lot better than having to walk around, in very stilted. I mean, luckily boxers are more common now. You can find them, a lot more boxer choices than the old ways of having pants, which are a lot more restrictive. But yeah, so that was my own sort of like feeling like I would actually quite like to wear a skirt, but I feel that's a part of me where I feel like, but I would feel, and I'm very rarely embarrassed, but I would feel I would be judged at the outside society, and there is an issue there, and I completely agree. We need to address these things of gender norms and whether a child or an adult not feeling judged to dress however you want and be however you want and whatever, because I really feel like it would make me even just a little bit happier if I could go out in the summer sometime and just have like a loincloth type thing on, and as long as I wasn't flashing anyone, I can imagine that being lovely.
Well, I think there's probably a lot of boys in the same boat as you. Yesterday at school, I was in with my bubble. I had 8 boys in yesterday and 4 girls. At lunchtime, we were playing on the smaller of our 2 playgrounds, and the girls there's some picnic benches, and we were all socially distanced on the picnic benches. 2 of the boys were doing their own thing, and the other 6 of them, I don't know how it started. I think it started when they wanted to impersonate Simon Cowell. So all of a sudden they appeared doing this dance in front of them with their they're all in non-school uniforms, so their joggers and their shorts pulled up as high as they could go.
Yeah.
Which, before you knew it, had transformed into these 6 lads rolling their shorts up as short as they could possibly be. So effectively, they were hot pants. and then they worked out that if they took the bottom end of their T-shirt up inside their T-shirt and then pulled it down through the neck, it kind of all wrinkled up and it kind of made like a crop top bra.
Yeah.
So they're all running around going, "Oh, look at my bra, look at this." And I said to them, I said, "You'd really like to wear bras and dresses, wouldn't you?" And 2 of them were absolutely definite. Yeah, we'd love it. So I jokingly said to the girls, they were all like, "What are these boys doing?" They're 10 and 11. And I just sort of jokingly said to the girls, I reckon if, while we're not in school, if you had to clear out of your wardrobes and brought in all of the things that you've outgrown and left it for this lot, they'd have a field day, and they were laughing.
Yeah.
And the boys straight away were like, "Oh, will you do that? We really want to wear a dress. We really want to." And whether that is all just part of that childish experimentation, I don't know. It probably is, to be fair. It might be for some of them a perceived comfort. Let me tell you, bras aren't comfortable. It's got that, but that's
I've heard, wrong. Yeah, the wire and stuff is not a friend.
But there is an element of that healthy play and that healthy exploration in that. And I think it's just when it becomes, actually, this is a bit more important to me. It goes back to that that listening ear. I mean, you might have a conversation later with your partner and say, you know, how would you feel if I wore a skirt around the house? So, you know, I need to have a bit of a breeze on these hot days.
Yeah.
But you know, and that's okay, and there should be no judgment about it. It's just ridiculous. Somebody somewhere along the line made that decision. Interestingly, at school we're reading Goodnight Mr. Tom, which is a classic. I'm not sure when it was written, but certainly the film version of it, I mean, it's over 25 years old and set during the Second World War. And we read a passage yesterday in school, which one of the villagers, they had a meeting in the church, and one of the villagers, a woman I think she's in her 30s, she arrived in the church and was wearing trousers. Now, the central character of Goodnight Mr. Tom is an evacuee from London who has been brought up by a very pious, abusive single mother, and he is astounded, absolutely astounded, that a woman is wearing trousers. But not only that, it's a woman wearing trousers who goes into a church. And to us, that's just staggering. You know, nobody would bat an eyelid if they saw women wearing trousers, but somewhere along the line, those expectations around what we wear and how we present each other, if we're male or female, were decided.
Sure.
And in some ways, as we move through the 21st century, we're sloughing off some of those ridiculous rules and creating new rules for ourselves.
Yeah, definitely.
As society. But then amongst that, I think there are a group of children, a group of young people, a group of adults who those very things are really defining things of their own sense of identity and their own sense of self-worth. And in those instances, you know, sensitivity and a listening ear and all of those things need to come into play. So people can still feel that comfort for themselves and can live their, I hate the phrase, that their authentic life, you know, but that's what we need to be moving towards.
Sure. Well, yeah, I think we're definitely in agreement in general there. And unfortunately we'll have to finish up now. But I would like to say, especially with this one, to anyone listening, or Nick, if you know anyone who is transgender and wants to talk about it, I think that would be really, really useful on the podcast as well, because I think there's a lot that I'd really love to go into, and a lot of my views that I would like to be challenged, or I'd like to hear other sides of it. And so definitely, I think just to sort of sum up some of the stuff I've thought about it is sort of like I'm all for play, and I love the play of children and adults and trying things out. I'm a bit concerned about how far some of it can go and the effects it could have on young people's minds. But I would love to hear a diversity of opinions on this. So and also anyone who's listening, please share this podcast with anyone you think that would enjoy it. I'm trying to get a bit of a bigger audience, not because I'm not obviously making any money from this, and not looking to. It's just the more people that listen to these sort of podcasts, the more sort of opinions can come in, and the wide diversity of people that can come on as a guest and things like that. So please share it around. It doesn't have to be publicly on social media. It can just be via email or text message, one of the links. But I'd just like to say finally, thank you very much, Nick, again for coming on.
Oh, thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. And I'll speak to you again at some point soon.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.